vamos a hablar pues cómo Omnissa puede presentarse como una solución muy buena bueno, Omnissa y más concretamente Workspace ONE, ¿vale? Cómo puede presentarse como una solución válida frente a otras soluciones que conocemos como MDM, pero en realidad es esa gestión de dispositivos de IoT dentro de la empresa, dentro de nuestros clientes, ¿vale? Hoy contamos para contarnos, o sea, qué mejor que ir de la mano del fabricante de Omnissa pues para contarnos pues todas las ventajas de Workspace ONE frente a otras soluciones, ¿vale? Y como os decía, hoy contamos con Spencer Pitts, ¿vale? Que es Partner CTO y Senior Director a nivel de EMEA. La presentación va a ser en inglés, ¿vale? Entonces, bueno, pues ahí yo os pido que tengáis paciencia. Si hay algo que necesitéis preguntar, dudas, lo que sea, pues nos la podéis plantear por el chat o si queréis las podéis decir a viva voz en castellano, nosotros se la traducimos a Spencer, bueno, como vosotros queráis, ¿vale? Y después también nos acompaña Giuseppe Minglieta, ¿vale? Que es Partner Account de Omnissa en España. Supongo que algunos lo conocéis, pero bueno, también nos acompaña por parte del fabricante y nada, lo dicho, cualquier pregunta, duda, lo que sea, pues nos decís. Como siempre, el webinar pues tendrá una duración más o menos de 45 minutos y después os dejaremos tiempo si queréis para las preguntas. Las podéis ir haciendo mientras se hace la presentación, pero sabéis que muchas veces a lo mejor hacéis la pregunta y os adelantáis a lo que vamos a contar después. Bueno, pues si esa pregunta se responde durante la presentación, pues mira, ya está respondida y perfecto, ¿vale? Pues nada, empezamos y nada, doy la palabra a Spencer. Spencer, you can start when you want, okay?
Thank you, Eduardo, and thanks everybody for being on the call. Apologies for my Spanish not being quite as eloquent as yours, but buenos dias anyway. And yeah, hey, keep me honest with questions as we go along. We got Giuseppe, who's going to be answering, I know. But I wanted to start off first of all just to say, look, there's going to be a lot of material here, and I'm sure everyone will go, can we have this material? The answer is yes and no. There are some legal things we need to consider here. You'll see as we go along, there's also a leave behind document, which is really aimed at customers, but I appreciate we have partners on the call here. There's just a little bit of constraint around some of the material here. So I ask that you respect that. I'm sure people will want to take screenshots. I advise you not to. We'll try and get out everything we can to you, but I don't want to get into a situation and yourselves where, we put something on the screen, you screenshotted it. So please do not publish that. It's NDA in that regard. Well, it's not NDA, but it's more like from a legal perspective around what we leave behind. But we'll make sure that we cover that at the end. But yeah, so if you can just respect not screenshotting for the time being and putting that out. I'm hoping that you're all on here because you have customers that you want to speak to and you want to make sure that they make the right decision around their solutions that they go rather than coming on from arming yourself in order to sell against to us. And it gets a little bit complicated sometimes from a legal perspective. So in the interest of that, if you can just not screenshot and etc. And we'll endeavor to get everything we can, legally speaking, out to you as soon as we can. Apologies for that upfront, but anyway, yeah. My name is Spencer Pitts. I'm the partner CTO and senior director here in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. I've had many roles across my long time, 18.5+ years with VMware, Broadcom, and now Omnissa. And currently, I'm the partner CTO, so doing a lot of work with all our external partners. Could be a number of different ones, resales, consultancy partners, but effectively in the partner org. And I've got a long background in all things EUC. So yeah, happy to be on today and looking forward to working with you potentially more closely. So I wanted to start off first of all. I've got just two slides on Omnissa themselves and what we do, because I think it will be really relevant when we come to have the conversation in a minute around. I know it's been badged as an in-tune complete conversation, but I think it's a bit wider than that. And you saw by the title, it was more around just how do we have the conversation around when the customer has Microsoft, is looking to go Microsoft, and also when the customer already has Workspace ONE and Omnissa products, because it isn't just an Intune only, it's wider. And you'll see later on that a lot of the things that customers do are a result of their overall needs, and it isn't just we have Workspace ONE, they have Intune. Although a lot of the time that is the question people ask us, especially from the partner side, and to a degree some of our sales teams and etc. internally as well. So with that in mind, I'll get into that in a second. I just want to sort of real high level is talk about the breadth and capability of where Omnissa is playing now. We believe we have an end user computing platform that covers all the major things that a customer will need in order to deliver a true end-to-end end user computing platform slash workspace or digital workspace. I mean, primarily it's made up of our long-standing products, Horizon and Workspace ONE, Horizon being our VDI solution, which has gone through a lot of changes and there's a lot of good stuff there. I'm not going to really go into the Horizon side today. This is more on the Workspace ONE side, based on the fact this is typically an in-tune conversation. However, I do want to preface this as well to say that at some point we'll be having a how does Horizon and Omnissa sit alongside the Microsoft offerings there, and what do you do there? So I will briefly touch on that, but the main point here is going to be more around Workspace ONE and the core Omnissa platform. We have a tagline of consolidation without compromise, and that will be really, really key to the messages I hope that you speak to your customers about. Because what we tend to find is that when somebody says that they have a Microsoft strategy, and I will get onto that as well, there's a load of gaps, and they end up buying a load of other tools. And that overall cost is significantly more than whether they consolidated on a platform like Omnissa. Because we believe we cover all personas, we can onboard them very quickly and manage the life cycle of those personas. We manage every single type of endpoint that you're likely to come across. I say likely because it gets a little bit interesting with endpoints, but all the, I would argue, where end users come into contact with a device, whether that's an iOS device, Apple, Linux, Windows, Android, Google, even things like digital signage, VR headsets, printers. It really is a true UEM solution. You'll see that's really important later on, because one of the things we always find is that customers don't just have your traditional Windows devices anymore. And the ability to be able to cover all endpoints, and endpoints tend to be different depending on your persona and the role that the end users have in the organizations you're likely to speak to, your customers. So it's really important to have a true solution that covers everything. We also believe that you need to be able to deliver all apps. And I kind of think of this as unified application management, where UEM is unified endpoint management. The new battleground is apps as well. And you need to be able to, whoever the person is, whatever their requirements are, to a degree, whatever the device is, you need a way of delivering apps regardless. And we really do believe that we're the best place for that in the industry. And then securing all touch points. So wherever a user comes into contact with an end device, some kind of touch point. I say touch point because it might be their device, it might even be a kiosk that they go into potentially a shop and then interacting with a kiosk. That's a touch point. It's potentially a security vulnerability. So wherever we believe that people come into contact and there is a touch point there, we have ability to up the security level of that particular interface. And then we also have this whole concept around optimizing all experiences. That's really important later on, because you'll see that when we talk about optimizing experience, that sits under what the industry calls DEX, or digital employee experience. So being able to really understand what's going on all devices, how the applications are running, how the users are interacting with them, network conditions, all the things that make up how a user might experience their way of accessing applications and devices. we need to understand what's going on there and make sure that is optimized for the way that they work. So they're the five main pillars that we believe that all customers need to think about when they're implementing an end user computing solution. And we believe that we do that, and we do it in a way where we don't compromise, but we're able to help customers consolidate the amount of tools that they use without getting in the way of the depth and capability. We can go very, very deep and we can go very, very broad, and that's a real unique for us in the industry. However, you need to work with other open ecosystem partners. Like we work really closely with Apple and with Google. We have some deep relationships with some of the key application vendors. When it comes to cloud, from a hyperscaler perspective, and also hypervisors themselves, we're very, very open now. We've changed, I would say, over the year and a half, that we've become completely separate from Broadcom. Omnissa now is a very open. We can play a lot more nicely with security vendors as well as other hypervisors now. And of course, AI is becoming more and more of a thing. And how we integrate that and how we best make use of it inside from an administrator's perspective, but also from end users, is really key to us as well. And we believe on the AI front, we're one of the only ones that has really got AI at the heart of the core capabilities around our architecture, how we deal with security from an adaptive perspective, and how we can really create what we're calling hyper automation, but you can think of that as workflows. Because ultimately, we want to get to the point on the right-hand side, you can see on the screen, that we call the autonomous workspace. And the concept there is that when a user first comes in, we self-configure everything they need to get them up and running. We keep analyzing what's going on, and if it starts to go wrong, we self-heal it. And we're using all the capabilities on the left-hand side that I went through to get users back up to a good known point. And then, of course, security goes hand in hand with that. So we want to make sure that it's always patched, it's always compliant, the latest hardening guidelines, and then the users that are coming in are trustworthy as well. So we put them at the heart of what we want to do, and we believe we are very, very close to. And it's always going to change and it will innovate, but this concept of the autonomous workspace is at the heart of everything we do. But that concept of consolidation without compromise is key to what I'm going to go through here, because we think that is our major differentiator, especially when it comes to Microsoft. So I just wanted to go through, what Omnissa does. This is the portfolio today, and it's made up of these four main areas. But the key bit we're going to talk about today, I think, again and again, is around Workspace ONE. But Workspace ONE is underpinned, just like Horizon, though, it's underpinned by this common platform service. It's a common data engine, a common orchestration and workflow. Identity will really play a piece in this as well. And the way that we do administration and the way that we've implemented AI, that is at the heart of the Omnissa platform and the core platform services. And they are really things that we've been honing for the last 3 to 4 years, that we think is a big differentiator with not just Microsoft, but a lot of other EUC players in the market. We think that's going to give us the main platform that customers will come to work on. So a little bit of the rhetoric first of all, but it's really important to say kind of where we want to go as Omnissa, and then to a degree now, how does that match up with the competition and what you're probably hearing from other vendors and potentially what customers are asking you about. So having said that we are a platform, we cover all the major areas, there are definitely things that Omnissa does not do in end user computing, right? Microsoft is very good at providing teams and collaboration tools. We work with that, by the way. We do a lot of good stuff with Horizon around Teams, offloading and making sure the experience is good. But we don't make a Teams product. We don't make PowerPoint. We don't make other solutions around what's in productivity suites and Microsoft. That's not what we do. But we do add a lot of stuff around it to make sure that it runs very well. But the key point here is, where there is Omnissa, there is always going to be Microsoft. We can't get away from the fact that pretty much every customer is going to have some flavor of Microsoft. And I think that's really, really important to us. So this is not so much get rid of Microsoft, but it might be in certain areas, make Microsoft better in things like Teams and productivity and email, etc. There's a lot of capability that augments Microsoft or collaboration suite and things that are in, say, E3 and E5, but there will be areas where we overlap. And that's the typical one that always comes up is around things like Intune. So I just wanted to preface with you need a how does Omnissa make Microsoft and my investment that I've already made as a customer with Microsoft tools, but also specifically around how we compete with UEM tools as an example, specifically Intune. However, what I would also say here is it's never a one size fits all, right? So I've broken it up into why do we have conversations around Microsoft here? And it's normally in three main areas. So when I go to a customer, I typically would speak to somebody who's selling the strategy, and we get quite a lot from customers that say we have an all-in Microsoft strategy, right? Everything is Microsoft. We've got a bigger license agreement, so it's a Microsoft first strategy. Sometimes we get a customer saying that they want to minimize that. For whatever reason, they might say, well, we want to go Google potentially, and we want to minimize. And notice I said minimize, and I didn't say get rid of, because back to my point, even when customers potentially say that they want to minimize, there's always going to be maybe server OSs out there or Windows over. There's always some kind of flavor of Microsoft still hanging around. So I don't think you can completely remove it, even if customers say that. Typically, they say they want to rationalize it. But the point here is they have a strategy. So then it's a case of, well, where does our strategy fit with that? Second thing we see a lot is commercial teams that say, I've just got an all-in license agreement, and I've got certain capability as part of that that's included. Intune is typically the one that comes up mostly, but there's other bits as well. So they come to us, and I'm sure customers come to you and say, I have this license agreement, I bought certain capability, I need to understand what you bring, in this case Omnissa, to either replace it or on top of it, or whatever it might be. But the point here is it's a commercial discussion from the people that have bought the licenses. Right? And then the other thing that we see is existing customers that have a renewal coming up. And again, the commercial teams are saying potentially that they want to look at the costs. Now, the reason I put that up there is these two things are the main reasons we get conversations with customers. There is a technical side, but believe you me, we never lose on technical. And I do have a lot of technical depth here and things that we will go through today, but we never lose on technical. If we're losing at all, it's because we haven't been able to articulate to the guys or our partners, or even sometimes internally, that the strategy isn't potentially the main strategy they need, or there's gaps. And also we haven't been able to demonstrate properly that actually, if you have Omnissa and your Microsoft agreement, that's a best lowest cost solution, rather than having a Microsoft and then you go and buy a load of other tools that I'll get into. So that's typically where, if anything, there is challenges, or maybe we haven't done a good job of helping partners and customers understand that actually commercially we are a lot cheaper overall when you add in all the other capability that you require. And I know that probably sounds like, well, I need to know more about that, and I will get into a bit more detail, but I just wanted to point out that technically, most of the time, we get technical teams come to us and saying, I'm being told by the strategy teams and the commercial teams that they are making a Microsoft decision. Can you help me, give me technical reasons why we should keep Workspace ONE? Because it's being pushed on me another tool. Now, most of this is Microsoft, as you can imagine, but there are others out there as well. But that's typically the three main areas. I don't know if there's any comments in the chat so far, Giuseppe, but I just wanted to break it down. So this session is going to be around how do we compete on the strategy side? What do you need to know there? What capabilities, and I'm not going to go through every single bit today. I'm sure you're going to follow up with me and say, can you give me some of this commercial info? And we've got a lot of things we can do with you as partners and with Arrow around how we can sit down with a customer and really show how commercially and economically Omnissa plus Microsoft is the cheapest way of doing this properly. And then technically we have a slew, like far too much for today to go into, but I wanted to sort of highlight the main areas technically where we are better, but also where actually there are gaps that are fundamentally problematic for customers. One of them is around security. There are some things specifically that are not in the solution or are not handled very well with, say, Intune, that will leave significant security holes. that could be fundamentally problematic for customers. So I wanted to go through those as well, and then just really sort of highlight where we win technically, because I don't think anybody I speak to says, yeah, it's a better solution in Tune. It's always like, okay, well, it kind of is doing what it's doing, but Workspace ONE I know is really, really, really good, but I'm being forced upon by others to look at Intune. That's typically the message we see. I'll open it up to see if anybody in chat thinks it's otherwise, and I'm always open to feedback, and I'm sure there's other reasons, but these tend to be the three main sort of narratives we hear from customers. So hopefully that makes sense. And I'll let Giuseppe read that. Right. Okay. So with that in mind, then, so when we speak to customers, what we tend to find is that they have other challenges on top of the core things that they get from Microsoft. They're looking at employee experience. And you'll see in a minute, we don't think that there's a really good solutions there. So there's a whole sort of industry of people that specifically look after employee experience, which is an add-on cost to the Microsoft typically license agreements. If you're a company that has got a lot of frontline people that don't just do, office type work, let's call it that, we don't believe that there's real strong capability from our competition here as well, right? So when you start to add in things like, again, Apple device management, you need to then think about how you do workflow automation. Sometimes there's remote support for things like remote control when a user has problems. And when you look at things like real-time monitoring, these are all significant gaps we think are not in Microsoft solutions, that people typically go out and buy other things and other tools. And we believe that if you went from an Omnissa platform, you can consolidate a lot of those tools and just use Omnissa on top of Microsoft, right? And rather than going out and buying these other more expensive tools. And I'll get more into that in the strategy piece here, but let's just focus on strategy for a second. So I put this here. This is mine. So if anyone's to blame, this is not an Omnissa thing, but it's something I say to customers and partners a lot, is if you think your tool is good enough, maybe your strategy isn't. And what do I mean by that, right? Well, sometimes we hear, I don't specifically hear it. I think there's a fallacy out there that sometimes the tooling is good enough. And I'm not sure where that comes from, to be fair. But what I do know that is if you are not looking after all of your users and thinking holistically across everything you need to make a proper platform, then a strategy that only contains one vendor is probably not right, and especially if that vendor is Microsoft. Right? There's always going to be things that you need to add in. And then the other thing I would say as well, we hear that I've got a Microsoft strategy as a good example, right? Well, I'd argue you don't have a strategy, you have Microsoft strategy, and that's a fundamentally different thing. And I think there is definitely a requirement here that we have other options out there. So anyway, what we typically see then, I sort of alluded to this before, but I'll play it out. Customer says, right, I'm a Microsoft shop. I want all the productivity tools. I want their collaboration tools. I'm using OneDrive. I'm looking at Copilot and the advanced AI capabilities. I'm Windows on the desktop and on the server side. I'm Entra ID, or I'm looking at it. Maybe I'm on-prem AD, but I'm moving to Entra. I kind of don't really use Defender, but I'm looking at it maybe. Some people might be using it. And of course, I'm now looking potentially at the device management, because I used to be maybe Windows with SCCM, and I'm also got some AVD or virtual desktop with Windows 365. So that's typically what we see. So a customer says, well, that's our strategy. And as I was alluding to earlier, that's great. And it's great that we have, end user computing, but the gray areas are the bits where I think most people would say that they do a pretty good job. Like, we're on Teams today. Teams works fantastically well for me. I also use Zoom, but Teams work really, really well. And look, Omnissa doesn't make those capabilities. Where we tend to have the challenges and conversations is around these four main areas. And what we see there is a customer will then say, yeah, I need to go out and buy another device tool or management tool for Apple, because I don't think that the capabilities in Tune and their device management really fit my use cases. I can do basic stuff, but anything that is really what I require, and there's a whole slew of why Apple and Intune is not anywhere near the capabilities of Workspace ONE. But for the time being here, what I'm trying to say here is that typically a customer has to go out and buy another tool for Frontline, for Android, Android is notoriously not well catered for inside Microsoft. They'll typically have to go out and buy another tool for support. And then they have to do a lot of stuff around ITSM, like how it fits in with their service desk tooling. They'll probably go out and buy another user experience or reporting and a management tool. Typically, the automation inside the Microsoft suite is not good enough for what a lot of end user computing teams need, and they go out and buy another solution for that to augment things like Power BI. The security teams inherently, and you'll see this a lot, don't really trust the capabilities of what Microsoft is telling them around patch levels, around whether things are compliant. So typically, the security teams would go out and buy another tool. Now, I'd argue that the end user computing teams should be able to tell the security teams that everything is good with absolute clarity and certainty, but they can't if they're using Microsoft tools. So the security teams will go and buy a Tanium or another tool like that because they don't trust the ability to tell me real time what's going on with my security posture, tell me as well how I can go and fix it. And then, of course, when they're looking at the virtual desktop side, a lot of them say, well, it's okay, but I need some other capabilities. The protocol potentially isn't as good. And I go out and buy another tool. And now this is, you could argue, a customer that's probably got all of these use cases. And then I know, depending on the size of the customer, they may not need all of these. But even so, if you go and do this, and you start with a Microsoft strategy, you're going to end up with a lot of other tools, add-on tools, and that cost of that is going to go up, right? And that cost we put here, I put some industry average. I mean, this is really to highlight the point. It's different for different customers, and this is where, I'm saying don't go and post it on social media, but on average, we see that customers' cost of their end-user computing platform when they start buying all of these other tools can be anywhere up 73% on top of what they already pay, which is a lot, right? Now, our point here is don't go and buy all those other solutions. We have a capability for Apple, really good at Apple management, best in class Android frontline, great capabilities around support tooling and DEX tooling, automation tooling we'll touch on later on, some really good features around app lifecycle management, which I didn't even include in that previous bit. Strong integration with EDR tools, and more importantly, we can tell the security teams 100% what the current patch status and security status is. So there's no holes, there's no blind spots. And of course, we have Horizon. So Horizon naturally fits in really nicely with AVD. We have a deep partnership with Microsoft. I know I said this was mostly around UEM, but there was a deep partnership with Microsoft around Horizon sitting on top of AVD. And also around apps, Microsoft recommend app volumes, our application delivery and packaging solution. They recommend that over all other things on their virtual platforms. But the bit in the middle is where we cross over. I'd argue that Workspace ONE is the best solution in device management. But you're going to see later on that there is a capability that maybe we can also sit alongside on Microsoft on Windows to add a lot of capability, even if Intune is still deployed. Now, you might think, well, why would I need two there? And I'm going to get into that later on. But, when we look at all the other tools, Windows is the one that typically comes into focus here. And up until now, there wasn't the ability for Omnissa to sit on a Windows machine if the customer had already had that Windows device enrolled into Intune. And that is changing, and I'll talk about that later on. And on the security side, there's a lot of things we add on top of Microsoft security. Conditional access. You'll see that with our Workspace ONE access. Threat vulnerability and understanding what's going on there as well, and integrating them with security tools. So there's a lot of capability on top of Microsoft, and in some areas we replace, and other areas we can add on top. But the key point here is to get away from I've got Microsoft, I don't need Omnissa, because the Omnissa has Workspace ONE, and I've got Intune, so I don't need Omnissa. That's not true. You're still going to have to go and buy all these other tools. So why don't you have Omnissa plus Microsoft? And that is the best way of making the cheapest way of running your end user computing platform. I know I spoke quite a lot there. Hopefully the pictures do this justice. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions around this as well. But the key thing to take away is it isn't just if I've got Microsoft, I don't need Omnissa. There is still a lot of capability and a lot of things that we do a lot better. And even on certain core platforms, we can actually install alongside and add a lot of capability that does not exist in the Microsoft solution without having to go and buy these other tools. That's the key message. So that's the strategy side. But I also wanted to just sort of talk around another thing here, which is tech is one thing, but when you're going into customers, really understand all of their environment and how many user types they have. Because typically we see that, and the red bit here is that Microsoft has come from an Office background. No surprise that their main tool in EUC is Office. So guess what type of persona they look after? They mostly look after Office people because that's their background, and you can argue do some capability around contractors and third-party staff, maybe management functions, so sort of more on the Office type capability, but specialized towards managers and VIPs and management. Whereas Workspace ONE doesn't care. Workspace ONE covers every single type of user type, and so does Omnissa. We come traditionally actually from more of a frontline background, but we cover all the Office use cases. We cover if you've got a customer that's production line, manufacturing, if you've got customers that are out there in front of fixing oil rigs or cars that are not traditionally using just Office tools, and we cover all of them. So that's a key thing to understand here, is that when you really speak to a customer and you look at all of their users and all of their employees, and to a degree the people that work with them, it's not just looking after just the Office capabilities. That's an old corporate IT notion. We believe that customers and organizations don't look like that anymore. A field line person or a frontline person needs just as much capability on their devices than an Office person, and we shouldn't look at them separately. And then I put a little bit, and I can send this out. This is not NDA, but to try and make it a little bit easier. A lot of IT people think about most users, which is your knowledge worker, you could argue. And I thought I'd give all these personas a bit of a name. So most users, he just typically uses Office productivity apps, or so much the IT teams think about it. Excel, she's mostly an Office productivity person. Connie Tractor, maybe she needs a VDI session because her laptop's not managed by the company that she's working as a contractor for. Android, maybe she works as a warehouse manager, right? And the reason I'm calling out these is the top two are probably where Microsoft has got more of a relevancy, but when you start getting into these other things, Casper Suite, that was the old name for an Apple management tool, by the way, but marketing is typically a user, and they have different requirements. Maybe they use Apple more so than Windows. And then, of course, developers, my persona of developer, we don't really know what they want, and a lot of IT departments just give them admin rights so they can install whatever they want, which is a security problem. But the key point here is that when I build all of these out, the fundamental things you get from some of the Microsoft tooling is really aimed at probably the top ones, and it doesn't do a very good job at all of the other types of profiles you're likely to see. So if your customer has more use cases than they do, and if you think they don't, that's probably because maybe we don't have full visibility of the other users. But where it starts to look at every single user and every persona, that is really where Omnissa plays. We look after everybody. We don't care whether they're Office users, whether they're frontline, whether they're production line. The things that we provide in the solution cater for every single type of persona. And that's really important, because if you don't have that in your capability, what are you going to do? As a customer, you will go out and buy another tool, and that's where the costs increase. So that's the strategy side. That's quite a lot of detail there, but that was one of the main things that I see a lot. And it's really hard for people to say, well, they've got a Microsoft strategy. How can I go in and have a conversation with the person that's got a Microsoft strategy? And the key here then is you bought, if they have already, a Microsoft agreement. Don't go and buy all this other stuff around it. Use Omnissa. We still have a play. We can replace in certain areas, and we are technically better. I'll get into that. But the key bit here is it isn't a case of if I've got Microsoft, I don't need Omnissa. Let's fundamentally squash that argument straight away. And as partners, there's a great opportunity for you to go in, really understand all of the personas, and you will be more sticky because you're really understanding their use cases. And it is about use cases, and use cases typically are based on what the user types are and the personas in the organization. All right, so that's strategy. I'll see if there's any questions in a minute, and I want to make sure we got time for questions as well. Let's quickly go on to commercial. And again, this is stuff that we can't send out directly in PowerPoint, and I urge you not to take pictures because this changes all the time. But what I wanted to, and I'm going to build out all of these here, is if you don't have a E3 or E5, everything typically is an add-on, right? Everything you have to go and buy. Now, Intune Plan 1 and Intune 2, I know there's been some changes recently. Microsoft have included some updates around certain things in their E3 and E5, and I will cover those. But if you start to speak to a customer that says, well, I've got the basic Intune Plan 1, right? It does everything I need. It doesn't for all the reasons I just said. So what they will potentially do is go, well, I upgrade to Intune Plan 1 because I need other capabilities there. And as soon as they do that, the price is exponentially going up. So that notion originally that I've got everything I need and it's the lowest cost really, really quickly goes out the window. So when we're having a commercial conversation, we don't want to start from the beginning of it. We want to look at all of their capabilities. And then you need to add in all the extra bits, like I said, third-party tools. You need to think about the infrastructure, especially if they're managing Windows and they're still using SCCM. There's a lot of on-prem infrastructure. And if you actually look how they're changing the pricing recently, Microsoft, there's a lot of emphasis on Copilot. When you break that down, there's almost like a pay-per-use aspect to that. So what appears to be in the base license quickly becomes more expensive. And if you need more info with that and you have a customer that really wants to understand, come to us, come to Arrow, come to Omnissa, and we can help sit down with you and the customer and really understand their pricing and how we can help them save money. But I just wanted to really get the point up here is, the basic stuff isn't fit for purpose. You will have to add on, whether you go for, increased prices with Intune, where you're getting into upgrading to bigger plans. That's where it really becomes easy for Omnissa to really distinguish about our capability over and above, because we are less expensive typically when they go down that route. Now, I also appreciate if the customer has got E3 or E5, they typically can say, okay, well, a lot of this stuff is already included, and especially recently, there's things, but there's still add-ons that they need to pay. Not everything is still included, even with the changes recently announced. And there's still things around PKI management, around their security postures. They're still going to need a lot of the infrastructure for SCCM and configuration manager. We still believe they're still going to have to go and buy other tools, even though some more things are included. And of course, that whole security paper use is still relevant. So it's slightly different. And if the customer has this already, again, we can sit down with them. But again, that argument around all these extra costs, when you put Omnissa plus what the customer has with Microsoft in their agreement, that is still a hell of a lot cheaper than going down this route here that you see on the screen. So it's an easier sell for us and for you, hopefully, to your customers to argue why we are cheaper. And then again, in E5, you get more things, but it's very similar. It's slightly different in terms of the capabilities here because a lot of those things now are included. But the key bit here is the cost. Each time that the customer is upgrading to an E3 to E5, that base level cost has gone up. So again, that is easier for us to argue against because that price differentiation isn't the same as when they said that they had it as part of the basic plan. So, I just wanted to call out here, they don't get everything they need in a subscription. The price is going up. There's still a lot of hidden costs. And it is quite easy for Omnissa to come in with you, with your customer, to prove why the overall cost when you go down this route, rather than just doing a Omnissa versus my subscription, that is not the correct comparison. And we need to make sure that the commercial teams and customers are doing that. Hope that makes sense there. That's most of the commercial stuff I wanted to talk about. A lot more detail there. I did have an example of a customer, but I think that might be better to take that through offline. So I'm hoping you guys can come to Arrow or try and get as much stuff on that side of things as possible. Right, let's get to technical. Now, this is probably the meat of the the conversation. And a lot of this, thank God, I can give to you because we have some leave behind the material. But the main thing I wanted to talk about here, and this is where we really play on top of the things that Microsoft doesn't have, is automations. We are very good at remediation and automations. Typically, a customer will have to go and buy another tool to fix the gaps that are not in there in Microsoft. Reporting comes back as a biggest thing that customers and partners and industry experts tell us that is not fundamentally in Microsoft and Intune. Reporting, the ability to get real-time visibility is also a massive issue. It can be days to push out an application. It could be days to get back the status or compliance of a machine, which is a problem when you've got, zero-day attacks and security vulnerabilities in the hours and minutes rather than days. So Workspace ONE by design has been designed to be properly real-time, scalable, and that's a big thing that we think is still not fundamentally in Microsoft. But we cover everything, we believe, and that's a big thing for us. We don't need extra tools in that regard. And I mentioned that we have a PDF. Now, I'm still trying to get the legal side of this. I'm hoping we can send it to you to give to customers, but for the time being, until we get that fully authorized, if you need this to give to a customer, let us know, let Arrow know, come to Omnissa, and we can give this to customers. It's just there's a couple of legal things in there because we're making statements about where we think things are versus it. But it's a really good document. I'm going to go through in a bit more detail here on each section around why we think we are fundamentally better than Microsoft Intune. But I wanted to let you know there are some leave behind the material. I'm just trying to clear whether we can give it to you to distribute or whether it needs to come directly from Omnissa. So bear with me on that, but there is collateral that we can give to you to send across once I get it sorted. Right. And as I mentioned before, this isn't us just saying this. This is, there are leading, how can I put it, analysts. One of them says the biggest thing that they have after they asked to look at Intune is, what are all the products I need to fix all the problems I have in Intune that I didn't realize were in there until I started looking at it? They are all, nobody you will speak to will say that they think Intune is good. They will always tell you about the problems, and even all the other solutions that plug the gaps will highlight all the inadequacies in Intune. So, there are proper gaps in there that need filling, and they are super critical to a lot of customers' organizations of what they need. So, overall, here's one that's from it as well. We believe that we have a lot more capability. There's a lot more security tooling in there out of the box. It's comprehensively in there. We have DEX. We have the ability to do things like, PKI, which is certificate and security infrastructure. And we get virtual apps are part of that as well. So no need to go and buy other solutions, things like security toolings, like VPNs. That kind of capability is in the core products, whereas a lot of those things you need to go and buy add-ons or another solution. So number one, it's fundamentally the base capability in Omnissa includes a load of things that you would have to go and buy separately. And then I sort of talked about real time. I kid you not, go out there and go and speak to a lot of people. They will tell you that when you push out something, it could be hours, it could be days. In some cases, I've heard of a lot longer than that. But on average, we see around about 37 hours for when you push something out to when you, on average, get back compliance that machine, that application, that thing that you pushed out is there, which is a problem, right? That is that I'm not exaggerating that. You need to go out there and have a look at a lot of industry stuff. They will tell you this is a big issue. And then as I put down the bottom, why is this a problem? I mean, how do you quantify that? There's a big security problem there. That's why security teams will typically go out and buy their own security tool, because they do not trust the real-time visibility and compliance that's being told to them by the EUC teams when they're using Intune, typically. That's why also EUC teams will go out and buy another tool. But our point here is don't go and do that, because we've got these tools built in. But real-time visibility is an issue. Multi-tenancy. If I've got bigger customers, and I don't know how big your customers are, they could be really small, ranging to reasonably large. Multi-tenancy, when you have multiple regions, different countries, it's really hard to do that in Intune. Whereas it's out the box with the way that we've architected a product, how we do, organization structures and what we do inside. It's out the box. But you need third-party products, and there's no, fundamental multi-tenancy built in. So it becomes complicated to manage and costly. And I like to say this is a little bit like Microsoft's tools. I don't know if anybody's got kitchens that they've updated recently. Wood was a thing back in the day, and a lot of people are painting their kitchen doors at the moment to make them look modern. And to me, this is really what's going on with Microsoft's tooling. They've added some capability on to make it look more modern. Fundamentally, it's built on legacy architecture that needs an update that isn't scalable and doesn't fit the modern requirements. Whereas Workspace ONE, we've designed Omnissa's Workspace ONE solution to be modern from the outside. Right? It's been rewritten over the last 4 or 5 years to be fundamentally modern. So I always say this to customers: it's like, you've kind of got a bit of SCCM in there and Intune, and it's a mismatch of both, and it's not quite. It's painting the cupboard doors, as I call it, versus a true modern solution. And then this one's been out for a while, but you don't need to read every bit here. But we've changed our SaaS architecture. We've re-architected it, and the big things here are scalability. How we do pushing out and getting real-time visibility. It's 10 times faster than it was before, and we've made it in a way that we can support all of these workflows and complex things that need to be done in EUC these days. It's a lot easier, and a load of capability that we fundamentally think that Intune does not have in their suite, or at least to the level that we think we can do with Omnissa. So, re-architected. Our architecture, we believe, is fundamentally better, but also sovereignty. The next thing is, what about if you want to run Workspace ONE in a sovereign way? So we have launched, as of October, something called Omnissa Sovereign Solution. And really what it's there for is if a customer really wants to run it inside the borders of, say, Spain, there is a way of running Workspace ONE, even though it's SaaS, with a local provider, to make sure that it's sovereign. And we fundamentally do not believe that Microsoft and their sovereign ways of running their IaaS platform also applies to Intune. So we think there's a fundamental, how can I put it, differentiator there, that we have a true sovereign solution that can be run. We don't believe that others have that today. So that's a big differentiator for us. And there's a lot of detail around what sovereign really, really means. But the point here is that it's run by locals in the local borders and sits inside local borders, and it is truly disconnected from a US entity. And then it's done in a way that is truly sovereign, which is important for public sector, but also other highly regulated industries as well. We also see that customers tell us that they think that they can't really do kiosk mode properly with Intune. And when I say kiosk, this is all stuff around whether you lock the machine down and it's like one application. Typically, it's when a customer goes into a shop or something like that, and it's a device there that they want to buy something from. I talked about visibility being an issue. That is number one. We get this back from a lot of customers telling us that they have issues around what's going on in the environment. It takes ages to come back. Reporting is a problem. It's really hard. The out-the-box reports are quite basic, and they have to build them themselves, and it's hard. And it doesn't have a true automation engine, so they might need to go out and buy something else. And you have to fundamentally use the MS Graph APIs, and they are not the best to work with as well. So there's some key things for advanced capabilities. I say advanced, but they are actually more and more fundamental things that customers need in the platform. But we know that we see these things again and again, and it's not just us saying this, it's partners and industry experts as well. And this really goes in with the leave behind. So everything I've done here, I'm trying to say in this document, we'll give you some info that you can give to your customers. So things like reports and some of those workflows that I mentioned are fundamentally in Workspace ONE, but they're not available in Intune unless you buy other things or you have to go up the suites. I'm going to skip this one for a bit, but only one thing I wanted to call out, which is everything we do in Workspace ONE is backed by Omnissa Intelligence. So it's our telemetry engine. So all of the things I talked about reporting and analytics, we are collecting all the time. Some of those things you have to pay extra for, granted, but a lot of them are in the base product that you buy. And we also manage virtual. So Horizon is also under this as well. So when I sort of take a step back, even though I'm focusing on the Intune bit, we can't, ignore Horizon is a big part of the Omnissa platform. So when we talk around some of these core capabilities, a lot of them equally apply to Horizon as well as they do for Workspace ONE. And that's quite important to know, I think. Application management. Pretty much everybody that uses Intune will tell you that the way that you get apps in, the way you have to distribute them, whether it's locally through things like content distribution networks, it's really, really hard. They don't have properly native packaging capabilities. You typically have to go out and buy a separate solution to deal with the whole app lifecycle management. Whereas this is fundamentally built in. We also supply what we call an app repository, which I think is really important for smaller customers to get you up and running quickly. There's like 9,500 pre-packaged apps to get into Workspace ONE. So that time to get people ready and to use the solution is massively decreased. So apps is a big thing. Have a conversation with your customers around apps. You'll probably find that they definitely recognize this if they're using it already. If they're not using Intune and they're looking at it, make sure that they understand that apps will be a problem. You need to think either you need to go and buy another tool, which again adds cost, or look at an Omnissa solution. Application with app volumes also now is out, mostly for VDI, but you probably know that we introduce capability for app volumes to run on physical. Why is that a thing? Well, now it means that you can actually have one packaging technology for your virtual environments, and you can also give that to Workspace ONE. So there's a lot of cost and complexity around one way of packaging. And that kind of packaging technology is actually endorsed by Microsoft. They admit it's their preferred, especially on AVD, way of getting apps into the environment. So there's great sort of Microsoft endorsement themselves around our application packaging technology and what we do there. And there's a lot of value to then using for things like in-house apps and complicated apps to get them into Workspace ONE alongside those repository apps as well. Because ultimately, Workspace ONE doesn't care. It can deliver any application. But there is a real good way of saying if the customer's also Horizon and they're looking at physical management, using app volumes is a great addition there and can save them a lot of cost. ITSM tools. So we support out-the-box integration with things like ServiceNow. It's really, really hard to do that with Intune. There's a lot of custom scripting, and the kind of things that are integrated are not what help desk people need. So we've introduced a whole ServiceNow connector as the main one, but there are others. But the real point here is don't just speak to the EUC team, speak to your ITSM teams in a customer, because there's a lot of things that can be saved in terms of first line, second line support, day two operations, as well as the cost of this in the first place. We've got some really good information about how we've done that for customers. I know time's running out here, and I want to sort of get through the major bits and summarize. Orchestration here, these things we can send out to you, but touch on this a little bit. We have something called a it's a workflow automation. So really easy scripting. It's hard to do in Intune. This stuff is out the box with Workspace ONE, and a lot of the key things you need when you build machines and workflows, they're kind of here, and they have outside connectors. So it's a real sort of powerful orchestration tool that we have built in that typically a customer would have to go and buy another tool again. And then lastly on this side, I want to cover the fact that we now, with Workspace ONE, alluded to this earlier, do not need to use the modern management framework in order to manage a Windows machine. So what am I saying there then? So if you're already enrolled in Intune, we can put the intelligent hub to sit alongside it, managed in a way that it runs through the agent, and actually we can add all the capability that I mentioned, even if the customer is still, got it enrolled into Intune. That is a big thing that we just released. That means that we can go and speak to them about the Windows opportunity. I think everybody knew that Workspace ONE was very strong in mobile, and then this was a bit of a sticker that if the customer already had Intune, you couldn't put Workspace ONE alongside. In this way now, it can sit alongside, so there's no reason why a customer cannot use Workspace ONE with Microsoft Intune inside Windows. And it does a lot of things on top. So that's a key thing. If you want, go and find out more info about that. But that's one of the biggest technical things that we think helps here. We also don't need to use Enter ID. If it's there, we will work with it, but we have our options. We work with Okta, so we are very flexible there. Coming up to the end now, I think we're just on the top here. So, I talked about commercial side of things. I just wanted to summarize now, which hopefully you get the point here that the real value is when they standardize on this as a platform to go and do all of the things that Microsoft is not very good at doing, and leave Microsoft to do the things that they are doing very, very well with things like Teams and productivity. That's not where Omnissa plays. If they do this, they will save a lot of money when they use Workspace ONE. I will get this PDF out, however it is, to you guys to make sure that you have the content. But I wanted to sort of leave you with this key takeaways that even if they have an all-in Microsoft strategy, they still need to go and buy other stuff. Don't let them do that. Use Workspace ONE and Omnissa. The commercial debate around it being included does not stack up when you look at the overall thing. And nobody technical really believes that Intune is a good solution. It only exists these other tools because Intune is not. The best way to do this is to have Microsoft their agreement and you put Omnissa on top to do all the things it doesn't do.